Welcome to the MTA Podcast Series, a weekly audio cast featuring interviews with recognized industry professionals. And your host, Ed Carlson.
Tuesday, October 20th, 2009. If the U.S. economy were an animal, it would be a hamster. From the University of Washington in sunny, slug-ridden Seattle, today's guest is Yoram Bauman, Ph.D., the world's only stand-up economist. Yoram teaches environmental economics at the University of Washington's program on the environment and is engaged in a number of consulting projects. He has appeared on the PBS NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, and his YouTube videos have logged over 500,000 views. He's written Quantum Microeconomics, an open-source online textbook for introductory and intermediate microeconomics, as well as the cartoon Introduction to Economics. Yoram Bauman, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Wonderful. Listen, Yoram, before we get started, you know, the MTA has over 3,000 members in 70 countries around the world. Why don't you give the folks around the world a little taste of what it's like where you're at today there at the University of Washington campus?
Well, we have some decent fall weather. It's actually not raining right now, which is lovely and a bit unusual. We've definitely turned the corner from, we have lovely summers here in the Pacific Northwest. But those summers end, and this one has ended. So today was actually extremely foggy. I was bicycling to school today, and couldn't really see to the end of the block.
Interesting. You mentioned on an interview I saw that if the U.S. economy were an animal, it would be a hamster. My 9-year-old son's favorite quote these days is that the wheel is spinning but the hamster is dead. Is that how you would characterize the U.S. economy?
Well, the hamster, there's certainly elements of the hamster that appear to be on life support, I suppose, is the way I would parse what your son says. You know, there are some signs that the economy has been picking up. You know, the talk about green shoots. Certainly the stock market is doing a little bit better. But, you know, the unemployment numbers are very bad. And I guess I would say that it's still not clear what's going to happen next. You know, are we going to continue to sort of struggle and work our way out of this gradually, or are we going to go back down? And I don't know the answer to that.
Well, of course, we've been through a huge financial crisis and lost lots of jobs. I'm sure you have a few comments on that.
Well, mostly what I do is I give people my investment advice, which is that I invest these days in Vicodin.
Vicodin.
You know, yes, it maintains its value very well over time. It's extremely liquid. You just sort of go down to the corner and you can trade it in for cash pretty much at any point. So, you know, that's pretty much as far as my investment advice goes. You know, I follow the directions on the packet that tell you how you can rebalance your portfolio if the stock market continues to go down, and you just take a couple of pills and that takes care of it.
I know you've got a presentation that I found very interesting, dealing with Mankiw's principles of economics. Perhaps you could share that with us.
Well, it's a fun story because it's how I got involved in doing economics comedy. It's the sort of thing that I don't think anybody really ever sets out to say, hey, I'm going to do a comedian and tell jokes about economics. But while I was in graduate school, I wrote a parody of Mankiw's textbook, The 10 Principles, and it ended up getting published in the Science Humor Journal, and then I performed it a couple of times, and then I put it up on YouTube, and I guess I'm part of the long tail that people talk about with the internet, because this is clearly something that never would have gotten any play before the days of the internet and the long tail. And Mankiw was kind enough to actually post the video that I put up on YouTube on his blog. And I've actually gotten a chance to perform in his class, which was great fun, his class at Harvard. You know, I think that this particular parody that I did in graduate school is probably the thing that I'll be remembered for, to the extent that I'm remembered for anything over the course of my life. And it's kind of it's a fun piece. I think that it's got a lot of good jokes in it, I think, and it has some pretty good academic content sort of lying underneath it. So yesterday I actually showed the video in class, and then we spent some time talking about the serious stuff underneath it. And that's really fun to do something that's got some comedy and also has a serious layer to it.
Can you share some of those principles with us?
Oh, there are things like choices are bad and people are stupid, but people aren't that stupid, and governments are stupid, but they're not that stupid. I think the debate that we're having right now over the financial crisis, and actually a lot of public policy debates that involve economics, basically have to do with a debate between the camp that thinks that governments are stupid and the camp that thinks that governments aren't that stupid. And the way that Mankiw framed it, I think, in his book originally was that markets are usually a good way to organize economic activity, but the governments can sometimes improve market outcomes. And what I did was just make that a little bit more pithy. Governments are stupid, governments aren't that stupid.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's a new book coming out, or maybe it's an update from the past book. It's called Super Freakonomics, and while I haven't read the book, obviously, it does touch on your specialty, which is environmental economics. Perhaps that's something you'd like to spend a couple minutes on.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I actually did get to take a look at a PDF of the book. I haven't actually seen the book out yet, so I should give you that caveat. I am an environmental economist, and I work on climate change, and basically my feeling about the book is that there's not a whole lot in it that's factually incorrect, but there are a whole bunch of misleading statements. And the general thrust of the chapter, it basically casts doubt on the scientific consensus on climate change that's been expressed by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, by the National Academy of Sciences, by almost all of the scientists at the University of Washington, all of the scientists that I know at the University of Washington. So I really think that it has not made a positive contribution to the public discussion in this country on climate change, and that's disappointing to me. I mean, they had a great opportunity to talk about something that they thought was important, and apparently their desire was to talk about this idea of geoengineering the planet by pumping sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. And I think it's certainly fine to talk about geoengineering approaches, but they sort of did a hatchet job on the climate science, and the way we are, where we are in this country right now, that's not a positive, helpful thing to do.
Mm-hmm. In your comments at your blog, you mentioned that you compared some statements to back in the 70s when we were getting a global cooling scare, and I really appreciated those comments, because that's the one thing that's always been going through the back of my mind, that when I was in school, they were talking about the coming ice age and global cooling, and yet here we are 30 years later talking about global warming. And it just, I was glad to see someone touch on that.
The point is not that people didn't talk about global cooling or whatever in the 70s, but there was nothing anywhere close to the agreement among scientists about global cooling that there is now about global warming. So it's misleading to make that comparison. I do have one funny line that's actually not my line. It's a line that I saw on somebody's blog about the sort of the general thrust of the Super Freakonomics book, and it's a line about how 6 degrees centigrade temperature increase, the threat of a 6 degree centigrade temperature increase sounds like a big deal, but if you take the temperature of the Earth in degrees Kelvin, then the Earth is already at 287 degrees Kelvin, so 6 degrees more is only 2%. So that's the sort of statement that this person who wrote this on the blog was trying to make the point that, like, you can make a lot of statements that are factually correct, or at least not factually incorrect, but nonetheless give a very misleading impression of what's going on in the world. I mean, 6 degrees centigrade would be really bad.
Mm-hmm. We're going to continue with our discussion with Yoram Bowman in a moment, but first a reminder that on next week's program, we'll have DTN Senior Analyst Darren Newsom. DTN/The Progressive Farmer is the leading agricultural information services provider to the North American corn, soybean, and cattle complex. Yoram, I remember hearing you speak and mentioning a story of when you were in my hometown of Wichita, Kansas. It involved a woman you were sitting next to in a burqa, and a burqa, not in a burqa. Perhaps you'd like to share that story with our listeners.
The story from when I was in Wichita. This is a true story. I went and performed for a group in Wichita and sat down for dinner before I went up to speak, and realized that the folks that I was with were on the sort of the conservative wing of the conservative spectrum, I guess. They were not happy with Obama. They were not happy about the idea of humans causing climate change, things like this. And pretty much when I sat down, the first comment this woman made to me, who was sitting next to me at the table, was that if Obama was elected, then she was afraid that in 5 years she was going to be wearing a burqa. So after the election, I sent her a catalog. Right, and I wrote a note along with the catalog, and the note said, look, I'm not trying to rub it in. It's just that the economy needs you to buy the burqa now, right? Like, we're in this financial crisis. We can't afford to wait for you to buy the burqa. You need to do it today.
Get them while they're hot. Oh, goodness. Would you like to talk a little bit about your cartoon Introduction to Economics and tell us if that's something that most of us might find of interest?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. So the book is off to the printers right now. It's going to be out in January. It was co-authored and illustrated by a terrific fellow out in Princeton named Grady Klein. The way that I think of the book is that, well, first of all, it's graphic nonfiction, so it actually is sort of it's a cartoon book. And the way that I like to think about it is that you could spend an hour or 2 hours reading it and learn something about economics and get a lot of economics jokes and have a really good time. Or you could spend 2 weeks sort of studying it, a lot more seriously and actually putting some effort into it, and you could learn sort of a lot of economics. But there are some concepts like marginal analysis. I mean, you can make jokes about marginal analysis, but at some point, if you really want to understand it, you actually have to think about it for a little while. And I think that the book it sort of opens the door for that. You don't actually have to walk through the door. You can just skim the book and get a bunch of jokes and learn something about how economists look at the world. And if you want to walk through the door, then there's an opportunity to do that also. So I'm super excited about the book. It was a great opportunity. It was a really neat project to work on with Grady. We had a very 21st century kind of relationship where we sent PDFs back and forth, and we've only met in person a couple of times, and we've only spoken on the phone a couple of times. So almost everything was over email. And I have a book/comedy tour that I'm working on for spring of 2010 to promote the book, and I'm excited about making some trips around the country and possibly even around the world to sort of talk about the book and to spread the word about economics comedy, which is a fun little niche of the world to be in.
Well, so is this something that's appropriate not just for adults but children?
Oh, I think that children could get a little bit out of it. I mean, depends on, certainly high school would be fine. Middle school, you could get some jokes out of it in middle school. Probably the thing to do to test it would be if you've got someone who's a little younger, have them take a look at my YouTube videos at standupeconomist.com. And if you think the video is funny, then they'll think the book is going to be funny. And if they don't think the video is funny, then wait a few years and then try again.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned your travels and travel plans. I suspect that your travels include a wider berth of the world than just Walla Walla to Wichita. Would you like to bring us up to date on what you've been doing and what your plans are for the future?
Yeah. In 2008, I went on a supply-side world tour that was mostly a trip to Israel with my father, but I got to do a little bit of comedy in Israel, and I did a couple shows in Europe and a show in England. I did a show at the Bank for International Settlements. This is the joke that I do for financial folks. When I told my girlfriend that I was doing a show at the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, she got very excited about this because it was a Swiss bank and that sounded extremely lucrative. And I had to tell her that, it wasn't that kind of Swiss bank. And she said, well, what kind of Swiss bank is it? And I said, well, the BAS is the kind of Swiss bank that doesn't have any money. And she said, oh, you're performing at UBS.
Oh gosh,
that's a joke that only a certain audience will get, and I think your audience hopefully will get that. So I did that tour, and then I don't tour all that much because I have a decently heavy teaching schedule, and I also, since I work on climate change, I don't like the idea really of flying around too much. So I try to pack my I try to pack my speaking engagements into shorter blocks of time and try to piggyback gigs together. So this last spring, I did a tour of the Midwest. This coming year, I'll be in the South a little bit, like in Birmingham. I'll be in New York. I'll almost certainly be in California, both northern and southern, including a gig at Google. I have a bunch of folks who are big fans of mine in the UK, and I don't know if I should say this publicly, but my complaint about the people in the UK is that they're terrific fans of economics comedy, but they all claim that they have no money to pay for a speaker to come to wherever it is that they happen to be. And then so far that's been a little bit of a challenge, but I would love to get back to the UK at some point. I'd love to go to Europe, and maybe even I'm actually looking around for maybe a visiting position or something like this for 6 months in the 2010-2011 school year. I would love to get some experiences in a developing country in China and India. Since I work on climate change, the impacts of climate change in developing countries and just the developing countries' perspectives is something that I would love to learn more about. So that's an opportunity that I'm seeking out at the moment.
Yoram, it's been great having you with us today. Is there anything you'd like to add before we close up this week's podcast?
Well, I just encourage all of your listeners to go to my website, standupeconomist.com. You can sign up for my email list there. I don't spam anybody, but I will let you know when we're doing shows, and you can check out some excerpts from my book. And I would encourage you, if you're listening or have a friend in the Atlanta area, I'm actually going to be part of the American Economic Association Humor Session in January. This is the second ever humor session at the annual Economic Association meeting. We're going to have a great time. A fellow who performs country music under the stage name of Merle Hazard is going to be there. And I've invited Austin Goolsbee, who's one of Obama's chief economic advisors and is apparently also a part-time economist comedian, to come. And we've already we found a name for his session already. It's going to be called Stand-Up Economics, the Public Option. So I've issued a public invitation for him to come. I don't know whether he's going to make it, but if anybody listening knows Austin, then they should drop him a line. And if you're in Atlanta, you should come check it out. It's January 3rd, and there are details on my website, standupeconomist.com.
That's great. Today's guest has been Yoram Bauman, Ph.D., the world's only stand-up economist. That wraps up today's MTA podcast. I'm Ed Carlson in Seattle. You can follow me at fatechnicaladvisor.blogspot.com or contact me at fatechnicaladvisor@comcast.net. Send us your comments and suggestions, and don't forget to check out my article this month or in November's issue of SFO magazine. Let's keep our stops tight, people. Good day.